Chapter 41. Marie's answer was quite predictable, as was her request for a cup of her own later that day, making you pretty pleased that your little oracle wasn't going to keep up her defenses indefinitely. You also took some time to properly introduce your newest and kind of only friend to your family, though you found yourself more than a bit confused at her reactions. Your father had the same effect on her that you had expected, seeing as you knew quite a few grown men that didn't want to draw his attention, and equally predictable was the effect the warmth of your mother was having on her, seeing as the temple she grew up in was, let's call it, subdued. What didn't match with your expectations, however, was her reaction to your siblings. For one day she seemed absolutely fine with them, at least considering the difference of standing, and the next she couldn't get far enough away from them. While your questions on the matter were pushed aside by her, which you didn't actually mind, or you wouldn't if it wasn't so confusing, she was yours after all, and you really couldn't care less if the gods showed her a more lamentable side of your sister or something. Cersei never liked to share Jaime, and that hasn't really improved if you think back on it, so it's perhaps really something as simple as her seeing some of your sister's plans to deal with her, should she ever overstep her boundaries. But apart from little hiccups like these, everything was going great. She was infatuated with your gift, and her apparent dislike for your siblings simply meant she became closer to you instead. Your time was made even sweeter by the reports coming in from the capital, retelling that the Tyrells were making an effort to secure even further support from the crown, much to the annoyance of the king. Though Marie remained silent on the matter, you're sure it's quite a big step in the wrong direction for the Tyrells, and honestly, what could the crown even send them? Certainly not troops, with all the problems the king is having with the Westerlands, and considering the debt of the realm, you really can't imagine that the crown can spare any gold for the Reach, nor would that help them. They're by now essentially just showing that the crown doesn't have anything to give its vassals, and that in the king's own castle, perhaps the Tyrells simply have a death wish. Your newest companion was all in all great company. While Marie has the tendency of being holier than thou, as some might say, she did slowly learn that even the wealth of the rock can't solve everything that's wrong with the world. She obviously didn't understand it, not really, but your secret glimpsing friend had somewhere along the way decided to put a bit of trust in you, at least when it came to matters of ruling. You thought at this point that she would slowly open up a bit more, but most of the issues she had with the world still remained shrouded, and you didn't have the slightest idea how you could change that, at least not without being overly insistent, as she would put it. Hey, Marie, is there something you need help with? No, why? No reason, I just thought you were bored or something. I am, but why would I need your help when I'm bored? Because friends help each other to have fun? Ha, that's not one of your plots, is it? It isn't, it truly isn't. What did the gods show you that you think so badly of me all the time, Marie? I told you that you won't lose your head just because you know a few things. I know that you're responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of innocent people, Azami. That doesn't sound right, but okay, is that really it? Why, do I need more to think that you're twisted? And what do you mean with, it doesn't sound right? Why do you react like that when you're confronted with your crimes? You sound a bit unstable, Marie. And whose fault is that? She truly is a bit of a softie if that is all it takes for her to think you're twisted. And what's that about tens of thousands? With all the rebellions and starvation, it should be a few 100,000s at least. You aren't some kind of amateur, you're a proper warlord. And sometimes you simply needed to make sure that your enemies were truly dead and buried, so that the proper order of the world could be restored. There's truly and simply no point in being gentle in a war where the future of humanity will be decided. What are you thinking about, Azami? Ignoring me while you think about whatever isn't nice, you know. Whatever the gods showed you is wrong, Marie. There's no way that less than 100,000 people died in my last war. Why by the gods are you saying that with pride? Well, if the gods told you that something was corrupting humanity and ordered you to stop it, and you had the strength to do something about it, then you wouldn't shy away from your duty, now would you? It's pretty much the same for me. If I think something is my duty as a decent human being, then I won't shy away from it, no matter the cost, and that's something I'm proud of. There is no right to live, Marie, and not everyone has the right to enter heaven either, and I would include myself into that group, but to get to the point, human lives matter, our insignificant little lives matter, Marie. That's why I believe that cleansing the world of monsters is my purpose, or calling from the gods if you prefer, and simply put, someone has to pay the price to properly protect the souls of humanity. Those that still call themselves humans, yet do nothing but destroy humanity with every breath and step they take are what I wish to destroy. Sadly, that involves a lot of, as you put it, innocent people. Then just don't do it, or do it right and put some effort into finding the right people. Azami, 1 in 100 isn't justifiable, so stop trying. I'm not trying to justify it, Marie. You asked me why I was saying it with pride, and I tried to explain it, and honestly, leave it to the gods to sort them out. They are merciful, are they not? You're really scary sometimes. Chapter 42. Though you were only telling the truth, Marie really didn't appreciate it, but neither was she happy about being led astray by the gods, so you would still say that the conversation turned out in your favor. It was also quite cute that she genuinely believed the gods would show her nothing but the truth. She was indignant enough that it looked like she convinced herself she was owed the truth by her very own gods. It was refreshingly outrageous. You thought bemused that she would make for quite the fierce wolf once she realized the truth of the world, so you quickly thanked the gods for a truly fine companion and then refocused on your work. You didn't really know why, but your parents were satisfied with your current work, at least after you explained why you took a week for yourself, or in other words, you could now expect that more of it was coming your way, meaning you had to properly catch up to whatever expectations they will set for you. It was to be expected. You couldn't see a future where your father would let go of you, not with your abilities being as useful and dangerous as they currently are. He probably decided it was a good idea to ensure you adjusted to some simple work in the rock, so as to properly measure your growth and limitations while you were still small. You had nothing against indulging them, especially seeing as they allowed you to pretty much anything you wanted to do as long as it didn't harm the house. You weren't like Marie, who thought she was owed what she was currently enjoying after all. There was literally no reason why your liberties couldn't be stripped away if your advancement was lacking behind expectations. In fact, it seemed like your sibling were already suffering the fate of stripped liberties with all the guards they got assigned by your mother. Mayhaps you will one day even get something fun thrown your way if you keep up the good work, perhaps even something as awesome as armor procurement. Now wouldn't that be great? The warlord and you couldn't help but get excited at the prospect of getting your hands on something so vital for the war. The army is pretty much the only property of your family that you hadn't had the chance of playing with. You guess that you can't really complain too much seeing as you're stretching the patience of your parents regularly, and it's truly no wonder that even your father wants to have something of his own that helps him unwind from time to time. But hope is all in all rather cheap, so you will just continue to look forward to the day your father finally decides to share a part of his favorite toy with you. Sadly, you couldn't do much more than dream of the future while you were stuck in the rock managing the replacements. You were happy that your mother had already planned where to put what, but it was still extremely boring. The only entertaining thing you had time for was showing even more of the rock to Marie as you two strode through the corridors, putting statues and the like wherever they belonged. Are those the last ones, Azami? That should be enough for today. Yes. If we're really done with wasting time on decorating, can we go back outside? Sure, I'm not planning to do more of this stuff than necessary, either. Awesome, let's go. It appears you weren't the only one that was especially bored today. You think for a moment before deciding that some fresh air really wouldn't hurt. The upper levels of the rock were still filled with troops from across the Westerlands, so the reason for why Marie wanted to finish up was quite obvious. Even little girls couldn't resist being awed by the great host marshaled atop your home. Your house wasn't limited by a lack of finances anymore, so your father had long since opted to form a proper standing army, a vast corps that would later be used to levy the strongest army a single house could possibly gather. Your father was clearly still after the crown and the realm, but his anger with the king didn't subside either. It was all going perfectly, which was why you could put up with being bored for a few weeks. For you knew that even if everything goes great and there's nothing to worry about, life can always find a way to become bothersome again. It's why seeking the heights of life is so very foolish. You will have to try and teach that to Marie if you find a good moment for it. She should really learn to enjoy the boredom of life instead of making it a torture for herself. There's always more boredom to come after all. Leaving the matter for another day, you silently continued to follow behind your companion as she skips around the camp that she made her target. You realize that she acts just like a normal child would on the markets or streets of Lannisport. It makes you actually a bit self-conscious, and you have to wonder if you look similarly unbalanced to others. If so, it would finally make sense why you struggle to make friends your age. How are you ever going to create a proper retinue if everyone sees you like you see Marie? You certainly have a decent amount of charisma, but you simply can't claim that it was enhanced by the gods. Looking at it from where you stood on the balcony, it was really preposterous that none of the soldiers seemed annoyed by her, despite clearly coming from one of the training yards. They should have no remaining energy to entertain a kid. Thinking about it, they really shouldn't, as in, they wouldn't even be let off the yard before struggling to remain standing. That's simply the training your father wants, and there's no way his men would disobey that order. That's actually quite interesting, isn't it? Chapter 43. Giving the matter some more thought throughout the afternoon and night, you end up simply deciding that the next morning would have to be reserved for a little experimentation. You were of course free of problems hailing from fatigue, but you could still make some good use of such an ability, and all these beautiful possibilities that Marie could open up to you were so very enticingly manifold in their nature as well. Who wouldn't get a bit giddy? A ship with a crew that would never tire out from rowing would be absolutely awesome if you can't use your statues for the job, and a unit of archers that would never lose precision was also quite an enticing thing to have. You had thoughts of that nature a lot throughout the night, as happens naturally when you find something so interesting, but you didn't really see your desire to use the situation as a thing to avoid, so you simply focused on Marie instead. You were of course as tired of sitting around in the rock as she was, but you were also stuck on how to guide your friend on where to apply her apparent talent. There was just too much potential to simply go with the next best solution that would allow you to escape the rock, for your duty to the future comes first. And you were honestly unsure if Marie wouldn't simply stick to whatever you tried first if she found out about your little list of experiments, or in other words, rushing things out of boredom would be foolish in the extreme. Thus, you soberly chose to take your time with your newest project, which after 3 hours near the different training yards allowed you to glean a few rules of thumb to your friend's ability. For one, there was no maximum range to Marie's ability, it simply affected a number of people around her, though you couldn't tell if the ability changed between them as they finished the recovery or if all of them were treated at once. In these 3 hours of observation, it also became clear that her ability was incapable of actually healing anything that wasn't on the level of a bruise, a fact that you were honestly a bit disappointed with as you wrote it down. Though the last and greatest observation was quick in refreshing your interest, for you realized as you focused on the pages of your little book that Marie's recovery magic, as weak as it was, wasn't at all restricted to just humans and animals. No, it affected the plants around her as well. This wouldn't sound like much to most people, at least on its own, but considering the lack of range restrictions for her ability, combined with your own ability to manipulate stone, you were sure that you could say that the massive cultivation efforts were now nothing but a thing of the past. The lands of your house were always fertile thanks to the mountains, but sadly, the very same mountains that guaranteed a good harvest were also the reason why the actual farmland of the Westerlands was so very limited. Hence, your house had invested heavily as part of their duties throughout the ages, trying hopelessly to secure even one more acre of land for the West, but very little of these efforts remained after each winter had ended. For while the magical snow itself doesn't normally remain, the real snow that comes with the winter very much so does. Hence when the temperatures finally return to normal, everything that isn't a giant tree or boulder is simply swept away into the sea by the floods. These events were a bother literally each winter, and were leaving little but devastated fields and rivers now filled with sediment of all sizes behind. Thus many a lord of the rock that was just years prior trying to return the lands back to productivity simply abandoned it altogether, making it all the more difficult for coming generations to even make the attempt. Your father and grandfather both didn't bother dealing with the problem either, and with the winter being so near, they actually didn't even spare the possibility a thought. As far as you knew, it was like the land didn't even exist anymore. But despite that, you were still confident that if you and Marie were to work together on the problem, that a profit could be made from it. And at the very least your father would be open to the idea of investing into a possible source of foodstuffs on the mainland, now that the sea was filled with the raiding fleets of the Ironborn. And making it work would also solve one of the greatest problems your father was having with creating his standing army, that being the problem of supplies, for even a small army of let's say 5,000 would eat through the reserves of several villages for a simple task like guarding the border. Even a single month with 2 meals per day would cost the surrounding lands and villages 300,000 rations, and the job of procuring the supplies from the locals would take up needed manpower on the border as well, meaning that despite the costs one wouldn't even have an army of 5,000 men anymore. The answer you had for the problem of your father was quite simple, and amounted essentially to, give them meat instead of bread. It's overall better for the morale, and it gives the troops the option of procuring local bread and foodstuffs should the supply lines actually be disrupted. There was also another big problem to feeding a standing army with bread, namely that it increased the price of said bread for the rest of the population, and yeah, that isn't the kind of stuff the commoners want to see, no matter how much they trust their lord. And here you saw the sweet opportunity where Marie's little ability could help out the Westerlands, for farming on the land under the mountains even after removing all the stones would simply be futile, considering all the wood in the ground, and the coming winters. Meaning that rather than try the same thing over and over again, you decided that the cultivation of livestock would be the way to go. You really loved the idea, for it allowed the two of you to get out of the rock for a bit while also undeniably getting work done. You could focus on cleaning everything up with your statues out in the wild, and Marie could focus on healing the grass once you spoke with her about her ability. Supporting the future war effort in that way while also reclaiming land lost decades ago was such an awesome idea that you became all giddy again. You really lucked out with your friend, didn't you? The land was wanted by nobody, and with Marie's range and so little in the way of life around, House Lannister could use this little spot in nowhere to support pretty much any number of livestock the armies of the Rock could possibly request. Chapter 44. It's great that we finally have something to do that isn't decorating. But why is the place so far away from everything, Azami? Don't tell me you have something against nature, Marie. It's nothing like that. I just don't get why you would suddenly care about something that isn't related to war and conquest. Well, I actually just said that I wanted that ability of yours for this. It's still related to war and conquest, as you so aptly put it. Great. Now come on, Marie, don't kill my good mood like that. See, we're already here. And indeed, you could already spot the enormous amount of work in front of you as you finished speaking, for even from afar you could see that the land was a mess in need of attention, but unlike you, Marie wasn't prepared for the sight in front of her. It truly seemed like the little city girl never actually saw what remains after a natural disaster that isn't cleaned up despite having lived through the winter. From broken trees to buried homes, these lands harbored them all, and after so many years of neglect not even a single village still resisting the pressure of nature could be found. It was perfect. Don't just gawk, Marie, we have work to do. You don't really want to fix all that, right? Not in one day, but yes, I want this land restored. It's property of House Lannister, and I think it should not just look the part but also contribute to the Westerlands. Fine. Why can't you just take a day off like a normal person and pray for the gods to do your work, Azami? Are you going to tell me that works, Marie? Not really, no, but I guess you would have a chance if you really tried it. You decide to ignore her continued remarks and simply begin creating more of your little siblings to clean up the giant mess before you. You're sure that Marie would come around eventually, for she simply wasn't the kind of person that could remain still or annoyed for long. Waiting for a few more minutes until she got bored again wasn't really the end of the world, especially seeing as the livestock your father bought was still traveling through the Reach. Marie was merely here on the first day of your efforts because you needed to test how much her ability could actually do, and of course to show the little fanatic that you could do some good as long as it aligned with your aims. Returning your focus back to the events unfolding before you, you could see that things were going quite smoothly. The biggest problem being the wooden remains that you couldn't simply erase from existence like the majority of the boulders that you had more or less unconsciously dealt with. And sadly, there was very little you could do but pile it all up to the side, for you honestly doubted that you could burn more than a fraction of the stuff as absolutely soaked as it was. Leaving the matter of the wood for later, you were happy to see that Marie was finally focusing on her work as well. She actually seems quite enticed with cutting and healing the grass over and over again. Perhaps a bit too much if you're being honest. You don't really have much use for a sadistic healer in your retinue, but there's also little reason to stop her from going in that direction if she really wants to, and at least you wouldn't have to deal with her morals anymore once she leaves them behind to finally have some fun. You didn't want her as a healer for your retinue anyway, you needed her connection with the gods to better deal with whatever calamity they wanted you to stop. Everything else was pretty much up to her as far as you were concerned. Looking around you, you could feel that whatever Marie was doing was working. Even if you weren't affected by her ability, you could still appreciate the change the nature around you was undergoing. The absorption of water into the surrounding greenery in particular was making your current undertaking a whole lot more pleasant. Though you suppose you will have to create some wells and enlist a number of workers to water the land if you really want to use her ability in the future, nothing that you aren't doing yourself is truly free, it seems. What are you thinking about, Azami? I was just wondering since when you got into mutilating things, Marie. Hey, it's nothing like that. Are you sure, Marie? I wouldn't cut the same piece of grass for half an hour without a reason. Perhaps it's my corruption that is rubbing off on you, who knows? Ugh, why are you like this, Azami? Not everything I do has a reason. Yeah, sure, the only human on Westeros that can hear the gods does the same thing over and over again because she feels like it. Do you get what I mean? Even if you don't realize it, Marie, you're quite special, and a mind touched by the gods is obviously going to change over time. Besides, sitting on the wet ground cutting down the same patch of grass again and again isn't something you would normally do, now is it? Because you're one to talk about acting normally, yeah? That's not the point, and you know it. Also, you were the one who asked what I was thinking about. To be polite, Azami, not to get told that I'm wrong in the head. Honesty is a virtue, is it not? Besides, wouldn't I be a terrible friend if I didn't tell you what you're too dense to realize, Marie? Then be nice about it, Azami. Or you could toughen up a bit instead. You're terrible. I know, but I decide when I'm terrible and when I'm nice, and to whom. But you just said that you didn't want to be a terrible friend, Azami. Yeah, but you're such an easy target that it's still fun to make you all huffy and annoyed from time to time. Chapter 45. You knew from the moment you met her that Marie was a simple-minded girl, but that she genuinely thought the gods would do anything with her as a medium without her having any problems paying the price for it was more than a bit disappointing, though you had no plan to follow her example in the matter. Thus, after truly thinking a moment about it, it became pretty clear to you that her body would be in dire need of balancing if your thoughts on the matter weren't too far off the mark. One could obviously fill the human body for only so long with divine energy, for much like a bucket it would at some point simply begin overflowing. You found yourself quite happy at your realization, for it allowed you to finally explain why Marie's passive ability was so comparatively weak and fickle compared to your own. It would have been a bit problematic if your current project was going to flop because the gods decided to screw with your plans for one reason or another. But if her ability was truly just an effort of her body to get rid of the energy unlike your own, then anything short of them completely stopping their interactions with her wouldn't really affect the success of your project. You did wonder if those early stages of sadism that you totally didn't see after her insistence could also be counted as her body fighting back against the gods. Gaining pleasure from the pain and suffering of others would certainly be an option for the body to affect the amount of energy coming in from Marie's connection to the Seven after all. Being around you seems to be quite the struggle for her body, but you would still guess that even if the gods showed her all kinds of things about you to push her along, that they would still recognize when it's time to stop. It was a weight off your shoulders that everything was working out as good as it was. You couldn't expect the floods to stop till the matter up north was dealt with, so the maintenance without your little companion would take more manpower than the land would likely be worth. You told her as much, but Marie wasn't privy to your thoughts and simply pointed out that you could use your statues for the workload if it was really needed. It was such a Marie thing to say that you couldn't help but smile at the naivety. What do you think is the point of our work here, Marie? You wanted to feed the army, right? Exactly, but now think back to your time living in Lannisport. I'm sure the Fishers had a certain saying about feeding people, yes? I know the saying you mean. It was something like, give a man a fish, and he's fed for a day, but teach a man how to fish, and he will be fed for the rest of his life. Yes, that's the one, and that's also what we're doing here in a sense. We use your ability and my statues because the thing the gods want us to get rid of is indirectly affecting the land around us with its magic, and not much more. People won't hear anything about our work here, only my knights are around, and they will remain quiet about the matter as always. We're doing the kind of work that will influence history but will also be forgotten by it. That doesn't really sound like you, Azami. Yeah, but that doesn't change that I said it. Look at it from my point of view, Marie. I can just open up the ground under whatever army decides to oppose the West, and they would simply be done for, or I could destroy the walls of the greatest fortresses on the continent to ensure the success of just about any campaign, not to mention that I could also create statues so large that no horse could outrun them while they merely walk. It's absolutely meaningless to me in the long term, Marie. This really is all quite pointless in terms of fighting, but I still have a reason to be invested in the fate of Westeros, and that is my family, and I have no interest in leaving them to the mercy of some inhuman monster that even the gods worry about. I'm not after the continent like my father, nor do I truly care about the will of the gods or glory. What I care about is restoring order to the world, for the only real threat to my family that I can see isn't part of that order. You're talking too much, Azami. You asked me if I knew the point of our work here, and then just kept on rambling. What of it? Sometimes things need to be made clear, Marie, and my point was that I won't use my abilities to pointlessly help even if it's easier or cheaper, especially not if it's just cheaper. I'm still a Lannister after all. I still don't get it. Can you please be a bit more, I don't know, normal? Hey, you're the only one I can talk to like that, you know? But if you need it even more simple, I want things to work out even if I'm gone, so I will work in the background to make sure that everything will work on its own. Are you okay, Azami? I'm fine, Marie. Why that face and question? You were all gloomy and depressed there for a moment. It's nothing, I just don't feel like my life will get a happy ending when the time comes. Thinking about it, you could ask the gods if they have anything set in stone for me, Marie. I think it's better not to, and even if something bad is really set in stone, you can always just change it. You're a dork, Marie. Hey. But thanks anyway. Do you want to pet some cows or sheep before you make more stone jokes? The first ones should be arriving in a few hours. Sure, why not?